Greetings to everyone. Greetings are a thing that Paul used a lot in every letter he sent. And we're going to look at that this morning just a little bit. Paul's greetings were a little bit different from the greetings we have in letters these days, in any kind of correspondence we do. Especially here in the United States, it seems like we want to say, "Dear sir," and get to business, or "Dear ma'am," or "Dear whoever," and get right down to business. Paul used the greetings a little bit different in his books, and he made it so that people knew who he was, where he was going, what he wanted there. One of the main readings we're going to look at this morning is Romans. Romans chapter 1, and I'm going to read there. If you'd like to follow along, that's fine. Romans 1, 1 through 7. Paul, a servant of Christ, called to be an apostle, and set apart for the gospel of God. The gospel he promised beforehand through his prophets in the Holy Scriptures, regarding his Son, who, as his human nature, was a descendant of David, and who through the Spirit of holiness was declared with power to be the Son of God. By his resurrection from the dead, Jesus Christ, our Lord, through him, for this his namesake, we received grace and apostleship to call people from among all Gentiles to the obedience that comes from faith. And you also are among those who are called to belong to Jesus Christ. To all in Rome who are loved by God and called by saints, grace and peace to you from God our Father and from the Lord Jesus Christ. Paul had been formally introduced a little earlier. He was introduced in Acts chapter 9, verses 4 through 9. And that's how we know who Paul is. But here, Paul lets the readers know who he is again. Of course, Paul, a servant of Christ. He really wanted everybody to know that he was a Christian. He was someone that would talk to them about what they needed to do as an apostle, as the first sentence says. You know, sometimes we look at these readings, and I know myself, I get in a hurry sometimes, and I read through the introduction, you know, oh, that's like the one in Ephesians or over in Corinthians. But these readings have a lot to say and set the tone for some of his letters. And they also have a lot to do with the things that he's going to address there. The best greetings of any kind of correspondence gives whoever's reading this the details about the author. It'll help them understand who you are, what you're addressing them about. And in this case, Paul, formerly Saul of Tarsus, we know that he was already introduced. And he also was pretty popular to the group in that area. And it wasn't just because he was a good guy either. Because they remembered when Saul was Saul instead of Paul. They remembered the persecution of the Christians that he had participated in, and the letters that he had from the high priest that he could go and persecute these Christians because he thought he was doing the right thing for God. But, you know, one of the things that we need to understand and remember here is that Paul was a servant of Jesus Christ. And he makes that perfectly clear in the introduction to this letter. Since we know Paul's story, we know who he was before he was converted. And we also know that when he had a conversion experience, it wasn't something like a conversion that lasted for a while. It was immediate. It was on the road to Damascus. It was Christ himself that converted him. Now I'm going to break this up a little bit and do a little bit more introduction towards myself during this. As for me, my greetings is from Curtis Porch. I'm a follower of God through Jesus Christ. I've been a Christian for 38 years. I recently graduated from Johnson University, which was formerly Johnson Bible College, in May of 2012. I have a degree in biblical studies and a minor emphasis in church media, which includes visual production, audio or sound production, and internet production. We know how Paul was converted. You just got a little snippet of some of my history. But we know how Paul was converted because it was laid out for us in the Bible. He was converted by Christ himself, of course. He had a major event happen to him that converted him. That was Christ himself. To get to know people in the church, he had to change his appearance to people in the church. They were used to the Saul of Tarsus. They were not used to him being Paul and being the advocate for Christ that he was. He was the advocate for the old regime. The Pharisee in him was very prominent, very prominent. Should we know how people are converted that we are associated with now? I think we should. Should we try to understand how dedicated they are to Christ at the point that they are introduced to us? I think so. I think we should understand how much they really are willing to do for Christ. How much they're willing to do for the church. Should we know these people well enough to know that they will have the information they need about Christ to teach others? Absolutely. While we're getting to know these people, we need to understand where they came from. Understand what we need to do to help them grow in Christ. And it's not just about what we need in our lives. It's about what people around us need in their lives. The greetings that we are looking at help us understand who these people are. I was greeted with some of you before church. That doesn't help me know who you are, usually. We have to spend time together. In other words, we need to be friends with these new converts. We need to understand where they are. We need to understand where they're headed, where they're actually thinking about going. And we need to help them on their way. And in that, a lot of times it's in the greetings. The greetings can help you see who people are. The greetings can help them understand who they are dealing with too. So as you greet people, it's not just dear sir, let's do business. It's more like greet them and help them to have someone that they can look to have a friend, to have someone to connect with, to have someone to talk to when they need to. So in the greeting, if you make that greeting very friendly and very open, and you help them see that you are a Christian, someone that cares, that greeting can go a long way towards them being connected with you. was converted to Christianity just before I married. Not exactly. I had been to church before. I had been to church when I was young. I had been to get vacation Bible school. I had gone to a couple of different churches in a small community that I knew. But I really don't feel that I had been converted to Christianity. I was converted in 1975, basically, just before I got married. Was baptized in 1976. Got married on Valentine's Day in 1976. And we went to the Church of Christ there in Alexander City for several years. And we grew a lot in faith. And I really didn't get converted to Christianity until I was baptized at that time. Even though I'd gone to church before, even though I knew many things about another church, I had been in a very small role in leadership in another church, but I really didn't understand Christianity as I did after I got the true conversion. The good thing for me was there was a very good preacher at the Church of Christ in Alexander City. And he was willing to take time and explain things to you. Take time to just, outside of church, have some time to talk to me, understand where I was, and understand where I fit into the church family. And that helped a lot. And his insights were very good for me and helped me to grow tremendously. I still wasn't the Christian I should have been, even then. We know that Paul had a history of doing anything it took to complete the task assigned to him. He was ready to go. It didn't matter where. It didn't matter what kind of circumstances there was when he got there. He was ready to go. And in his introductions to these letters, you could sense that. You could get that from him. He was devoted to his people. And he really wanted to let them know what they needed to do and how they needed to act and how they needed to grow in Christianity. And he always showed them so much love in the introduction to his books. He didn't just leave. He didn't just set out and say, "Okay, listen, guys, you're messing up. You're not doing it right." He was able to do that, but he was also able to, in his introductions, give them something to hold on to. Usually it was grace and peace and those type of things that he talks about that they could really hang on to, even through the tough part of the letters. And he has some pretty tough parts in some of his letters too. He thought before he had been converted that he was doing the work of Christ. He really thought he was doing the right thing. And of course it was more God's work, similar to the Old Testament convictions. What about our convictions? Are we convicted that hard? Are we convicted so much that if we were on the other side, let's face it, we could be just like Paul was. We could be just like Saul was before he was converted. We could be doing just as much harm as he did. If we were on the other side as an advocate for Satan, would Christ come after us? Would he come and say, "Look, you're persecuting me. You're doing the wrong thing"? We know we're on the right side. We're trying to work towards Christ. But I'm just giving you that thought is, if I was on the other side. Would I have to worry about Christ coming and striking me blind in the middle of the road somewhere? Am I that strongly convicted? My conviction has grown here through the years. I'm sure yours have too. And some of you here are so convicted that you would. If you were on the other side, Christ would be looking at you. I know it. So we have to make sure that people see that. Make sure that through our work daily, through our dealing with other people, that they can see our conviction. Can we let people see that during our introduction to them? Paul could. He always said something about he always said something about the times what he was doing and why he was doing it during his introductions. What about us in another way? When someone's converted, do we immediately help these new converts to understand their responsibility? The responsibility that was laid out for us in Matthew 28. Of course, Matthew 28, everybody knows this is the commission. Let's just read it, just because that's our charge. Then the 11 disciples went to Galilee, to the mountain where Jesus had told them to go. When they saw him, they worshipped him, but some doubted. Then Jesus came to them and said, all authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me. Therefore, go and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, and teaching them to obey everything I have commanded you. And surely I am with you always to the very end of the age. We have that confidence that he's always going to be with us. When we introduce ourselves to people, do we convey that we have that charge? Do we have that task set forth to us in this life? Or do they just look at us as just another guy come down the street and not really be concerned about whether or not we're a Christian? There's so many people in the world today that are very much against Christians, even in this country, that, if you are not presenting yourself in your greeting to them as you are a Christian, are you really doing what you need to do? I know there's times that I kind of slip in there myself. I don't really present. As I was building for a while, I got to be known a little bit better by the people who worked for me than I was. Some of them even called me preacher at times, out on a construction job. And that's something that I didn't ask for, but it was kind of like to me that, well, at least they know who I am. At least they understand who I am. We also know that Paul, from his history, did not grow into being a Christ advocate over a lot of years. He was converted immediately. He went right straight to the task of converting people, and he did a very good job. We, as Christians, as we convert people, we need to watch that, I think. As other people are converted, we need to allow them to work on this, but at the same time, they need to develop their own greeting for people. They need to let them know that I'm a young Christian, and I believe, and I want you to be too. And I think that we need to help them grow. We need to encourage them to bring others to church with them. We need to encourage them to bring the friends and family around them that they have already. But at the same time, we need to be careful to make sure that they're not putting things out there that they don't need to. Do we do that now? Some of us do, I think. Some of us may not. Some of us may be a little bit afraid. As for me, another little interlude here for myself. I did not become a strong Christian until some years after I was actually baptized. I had a wake-up call that was not like Paul's on the road to Damascus, but I had an injury from an industrial accident that put me in the bed for 2.5 months. And if you really have never had that happen to you, and I actually couldn't get out of the bed for like a month and a half. I had to lay there. And if at that time I didn't have the remote control for the television or whatever, and if I was in bed or I ended up on the couch some days and my wife would help me get in there. If the television was on, you watched whatever was on all day long because she was out. But if you ever have had just so much time to just sit and think about your life, that helped me change my life a whole lot. Paul's greetings after that, we learned, is about, he elaborates on things to make his audience believe what he's going to say. He elaborates on Christ and the fact that he is working through Christ. It's not him, it's Christ. The gospel that was consistently promised by the old prophets is one way he always let them know that he was working through for Christ. And the gospel is brought to us by Christ himself, was in his greetings, always. He always made sure that everybody knew that it was Christ and not him. He helped his audience understand, and since he did, we now understand also that Paul was a real strong advocate and made sure that everything he did was above board, right by what we know as the Bible, but he didn't have the Bible at that time. He was writing. So he was a very strong leader, very strong advocate of the things that should be. He always wanted to make sure that Christ's position as he was connected to the lineage was prescribed by God in the prophetic writings of the Old Testament. He always did that in his introduction. And he always showed that Christ was not only human through the lineage, but he was also God. In my correspondence this morning is kind of in the same nature. My correspondence is to you, and it's through Christ. It's from the Bible. Paul didn't have it. We do. But my correspondence also is in person. A lot of times Paul couldn't be there in person. If he hadn't been, we wouldn't have near as much information now as we had then, or as they had then, because Paul wrote it all down. He made sure that these churches that he was writing to had the information they needed to continue on, to have a good church. In his introduction, he always let them know that this was correspondence to their church, and he named it. He had named, of course, people of Corinth, Corinthians, the people of Thessalonians, people of Galatia, Galatians, and Ephesus, which was Ephesians. He let them know who he was writing to. There was no question about what was going on. And he always, in his introduction, described, these are the people that I'm talking to at this point in time. These books were personally addressed by him, and they always have him in them. And there's a couple of books that don't have him as Paul, but most of them have him as addressing Christ. I, Paul, apostle of Christ. My correspondence to you is simply a messenger. I'm teaching and preaching from what Paul wrote, what other writers wrote of the time, and bringing to you Christ himself. It's not about me. It's about Christ. It also is so important for us to understand that all these writings were inspired by God. Everything that came to us through the Bible, from Paul, from Matthew, Mark, the other writers, the Old Testament writers, it's always important to realize that God was there, and God made sure that the right things were put down. After the writers had written it all, then it was up to the church to make sure that everything was put in the Bible properly. And I think God had a very, very active role in this through all times. And I think that one of the reasons that is so clear in the introductions to all the books that have introductions with it, that God wanted to make sure that we knew that these introductions were, in fact, from writers that meant something to the church fathers. We live in a different time with different problems. Isn't it amazing that the Bible still addresses us? Isn't it amazing that we can go and read about problems we have 2,000 years after it was written, and they fit. They fit perfect. They make so much sense. I mean, there'll be times when I sit down and read something and I don't realize that it's in there, and I'll read that, and it just, it fits the situation that I've been in so clearly, and helps me get through some of the situations. This book was written so well by so many different authors and fits together so well. God had to be involved. And he had to be the one to help these writers to understand that they need to introduce themselves. They need to do a good introduction so that we, 2,000 years later, can understand where these people were and how we can use the same word that they used to take care of our lives and move on and live for Christ. Another important aspect of Paul's writings, especially, is not only did he do an introduction at the beginning of the book he was writing, a lot of times he went to the trouble to do a greeting at the end. He would name people. He would name names. And he would tell about the good things they've done. He would connect these people to his writings. He helped them feel good at the beginning with a greeting. He helped them feel good at the end with a greeting. Because even though in the middle, a lot of times he had a lot to say about things that they were not doing right, that they needed to step up their thoughts on and get it corrected. but he always left them feeling like they had actually accomplished something, that everything they did wasn't just fake. It didn't matter if they had things going on that they really didn't need to be doing. They didn't need to go back to the Roman way of life. He still helped them understand that they were doing good and helped them have a good feeling about what they had done. During the time before service, I got to know some of you a little bit. Some of you have grandchildren in Milligan. I've got a child in Milligan. Some of you have other connections to there. Some of you have a lot of other Christian thoughts and Christian ways that need to be acknowledged. I went on your website. I saw things like a few ladies getting ready for some kind of a feast. I saw men doing some things and they had joy about them. And you could tell that not just people with coat and tie come here. People with overalls come here. And it's great. You can tell a lot of things are really good. And I don't have to actually know every single one of you to understand it. I hope you get to know you some in the future. I hope that my greetings to you are good. I hope that everyone here has the joy that Christ left for us all. And I hope that all of us are able to understand one another and move on. I really appreciate the opportunity to be here this morning. I haven't preached a lot since I got out of school. In fact, I only preached maybe once since I got out of school. And I appreciate the fact that you put up with me this morning. And I hope that you got a little something out of what I said. And I pray that each and every one of you have a wonderful week coming up. And thank you very much.